by having each of our panelists kind of share your Balik-Bayan story, and maybe in the case of Ron, who shares expat story. So let's kick it off with Rexy and Roland. Maybe you could share more about, what your story of Balik-Bayan was.
Haha, Rexy, did you want to go
Roland,
first?
you start.
All right, cool. Yeah, so hey everyone. Wow, I'm actually taking a look at a list of the people there, and there's a lot of amazing people on this chat, and it's been great, really being able to experience this journey. So, long story short, I'm Filipino American. I was born and raised in Los Angeles, and what? My mom's on this Zoom call, so this is funny. So she'll appreciate this. I see my mom there, Cheryl Manansala. Hello, Cheryl Manansala. So basically, she raised me, my mom, and I didn't really know that much about the Philippines other than my mom's adobo or sinigang. And I finally had this opportunity in college to study abroad in the Philippines. And I had this life-changing experience in college. And I knew in my heart that someday I would come back. And after graduating, I did a couple things here and there. I had an opportunity to help grow a startup. We experienced an exit. It was a performance marketing company that integrated with Facebook. And it was a big enough of an exit that I was able to use those resources to come back and engage in humanitarian and community service work. And it was actually during that process of going back and forth between the US and the Philippines that I met Rexy. And, Rexy, he was a student at Brown University when he founded his nonprofit, Kaya Ko. And I was so inspired by the work that he was doing, focusing on some of the most promising Filipino students all around the country. And, Filipino students at Harvard, Filipinos at Stanford, Georgetown, Brown, and they would engage in these 2-month-long internships, these life-changing internships that reminded me of my own personal experience when I was in college. So here you're seeing college students who were getting into Amazon, but rejecting that job offer and going to the Philippines to start an AI company. Or instead of being an investment banker in New York, he ended up helping a family business in Quezon City. And story after story, Rexy's work actually caught the attention of the Philippine ambassador to the United States, Jose Quisha. And, I was really inspired by this initiative that he had to bring people over. And, it was that kind of challenge of really coming back to the Philippines to start a company. That was the foundation. So I don't know, that's kind of like a really quick one, but, we could use the rest of the discussion to go in more detail. But Rex, if you wanted to provide some color.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I was born in Dumaguete. I lived in the Philippines for about 11 years before moving to the US, to like Cleveland, Ohio, of all places, and like to a middle school and a high school that had, was it four, not even Filipino, like 4 Asian Americans, one other Filipino out of like 1,200 people, right? So I spent a lot of that time kind of trying to unlearn being Filipino and like trying to fit in like where I was. And then when I got to college, started to make my way back from a distance mostly, right? Like relearning about Filipino culture, the Filipino American community. On the other side, I studied economics and international development and like focused on countries like Brazil, but couldn't really, at least in like the formal coursework, couldn't really find things that were focused on the Philippines, right? So like in my last year, at college, I realized that there was this gap where I'd spent a lot of time on like Filipino culture, but like not actually like in the Philippines, and I spent a lot of time in thinking about and like learning about international development and economics, but again, like Philippines, I'd have to carve out in like papers and like independent studies to learn about the Philippines specifically. So that's where kind of to what Roland mentioned, I ended up putting together this program. Actually, after a week after my internship at Endeavor before my senior year. So I think that was like basically inspired by the experience I had like interviewing a bunch of different entrepreneurs and policymakers when I was in the interning at the Endeavor New York office. The last week of that summer, I started putting together the foundations of what became this nonprofit called Kaya Collaborative, or Kaya Co, which for about 5-6 years brought back Filipinos, college students and recent graduates from the Filipino American, Filipino Canadian, Filipino European community back to the Philippines to work in these internships with social enterprises, tech startups. And in that process, I met Roland. So that was important. He pulled me along to the Kumu journey. B, kind of got a deeper view of the types of things that people were building from within the Philippines, and this sense that there was a lot more to be built and to be grown. And C, I went from graduating to trying to do this nonprofit full time, and kind of like just barely paid the bills from individual donations and like small grants for those 3-4 years, and got a crash course in just like how hard it is to build an organization in that process, which also I think kind of prepared me for eventually jumping into Kumu in 2017, technically 2018, like for real. So yeah, that's a little bit, and we can jump into a bit more detail.
Yeah, we'll definitely jump into that whole process.
Yeah, definitely. And later on, you can discuss also, as Manny mentioned at the start, Balik-Bayan doesn't necessarily just mean coming back home to the Philippines, but also paying it forward. I guess shifting things a bit, Ron, maybe you could share also a bit of your expat story. What drew you to the Philippines out of all places?
Sure. So I guess in terms of my background, prior to coming here, I was a founder in the Bay Area. I started a company that was backed by Sequoia, ended up being acquired by Telefonica. And then I spent some time on the investor side with a venture fund called Innovation Endeavors. And I guess it got to the point where I wanted to go back kind of on the entrepreneurial side. And I knew I wanted to do something that wasn't just big, but also had a meaningful, positive, social impact. And so I guess, there's a long story of how I ended up in the Philippines, but the short of it is that I really strongly felt that this is a place where I can, my skills can be applied to actually do something that has a higher purpose, and the opportunity to do things in the Philippines, do things that are interesting, and to kind of lift like substantial pieces of infrastructure, I think is for me felt much much more attractive than doing something that was maybe like more incremental innovation back in the Bay Area.
Okay, and I guess building on that, Ron, when you looked at the Philippines, what were some of the pros and cons that you saw? Like, what do you think needed development? You kind of touched on some infrastructure and innovation, but at the same time, what do you think were some of the challenges you had coming into the Philippines?
Sure. So, I remember I drew a whole metrics. Actually, I drew out all markets in Southeast Asia, and I compared them on a bunch of different vectors. And, I think in terms of pros, large, relatively young demographic, English speaking, relatively non-competitive environment when it comes to technology. There's still a lot of opportunity here. There's a lot on the pro side, right? I think the things that people typically find hard coming into the Philippines from the US are kind of more like, let's say, like markets are farther along. A little bit, I think the pace, sometimes the bureaucracy, lack of infrastructure. When I came, even mobile internet was not that great. Now it's a lot better. But the thing to remember is when you look at all those gaps, like as an entrepreneur, right? There are pains, but there are also opportunities, right? So yeah, it was hard to even make move money from one bank to another when we got here, and so that's that's where we started Coins. So I think like a lot of these issues, like lack of trust in the market, etc. All those like really present great opportunity for technology to present solutions.
Okay, cool. I guess moving on to Rexy, you kind of touched on building Kaya Co first, and coming to the Philippines, and moving that focus and shifting to Kumu, what was your thought process and some of the pros and maybe some of the challenges you guys had?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, when I was working on Kayakore, it was the like kind of hard mode in terms of building a venture, where it was nonprofit driven. You couldn't take like investor money, and so it was kind of relying on people, just philanthropic residents with the mission and wanting to see it done. We were all either college students or like 1 or 2 years out of college building it. And we had a model that was primarily, I think it was like augmented by technology in many ways, but for the most part, like it was still like you had to bring 10, 20, 30 people at a time to come back to the Philippines for 2 months and do this program. And from that, like what we saw was, and what we learned from the companies that we were working with was just how much room there was to and how we were just really like scratching the surface in terms of what we could do in building this connection, right? Of the entire kind of Philippine nation, which is growing like immensely, and on the other side, the global Filipino diaspora that in a lot of ways is kind of looking for consciously or otherwise, like looking for ways to connect back, and interested in ways to connect back. So it was like kind of seeing that, doing a bit more work on I helped write a book that was about kind of digital transformation in the Philippines, or digital disruption in the Philippines, and kind of just started to with Roland look at these things that were happening in China, in Korea, in Japan, with platforms like WeChat and Line and Kakao that were not only like reaching millions and millions of people, but were actually becoming like economies of their own, where in WeChat, for example, at the time, and probably more now, there were 500,000 mini apps built on top of WeChat, and like probably more than that in terms of like companies and businesses that are built on top of WeChat, right? So for us, it was kind of seeing that and seeing the Philippines and seeing what we knew about the global Filipino community, and knowing that there was something there that hadn't been done yet in the market that if it was successful, could not only reach a lot of people, but also become like a platform for people to build on top of and create livelihoods on top of, right? And so that was, we kind of went from that to the Wrong Play, which was a messenger app at first in early 2018, to eventually pivoting to a live stream platform. But I think in as much as we've changed and evolved in the past few years, it's always kind of been that same driving question and motivation, and that we're starting to kind of like circle back to and get closer to now, right? Like now there's 1,000 people almost, or 800 people who are earning a full-time income by streaming on Kumu, and we're just starting to kind of unlock that, and so yeah, I think that for us was there's just a huge, and to what Ron was saying, right? There is the kind of huge kind of space for things to be built that we wanted to not only be like a participant in, but then also like create a platform and a network that people could build on.
Definitely. I'm seeing the common theme here being, there's that incremental innovation that you can build on, and you can definitely expand so much there. Roland, anything else to add in this point?
Yeah, I think so you guys say incremental. I think one of the key things that we've learned also is sequential, right? So for example, when so look at like some of the big infrastructure things, right? Billions of dollars being spent on internet infrastructure, and then the evolution of cheap smartphones, and then a young population that's mostly Gen Z millennial. And so when 3G was popular, right? Kumu, or not Kumu, sorry, because I'm always thinking us in the Philippines, but Philippines was the texting capital of the world, right? And then when you start going right into 4G, then it becomes the social media capital of the world. And then as LTE becomes cheaper, you're starting to see it become more of a streaming capital of the world. So you can only imagine what the implications and the use cases could be once 5G starts hitting all over the country, where now you have an entire generation of young people going mobile first instead of laptop first, right? So there's a lot of different types of things, and you know, to Ron and Rexy's point, when you actually start timing this from a sequential perspective, you can start recognizing not what like a total product market fit, but what I call adjacent product market fits within these particular sequences from an adjacent perspective. So I'm very, very excited about you know, what the next 5 years will be. So
yeah, just to add to that, right? I think one of the things is that like can I think one of the most exciting things if you're building a company or an investor or whatever it is, right, is like if you feel like you know something that the rest of the world doesn't, right? And I feel like the Philippines is one of those places where if you're in there's just so many like secrets about the Philippines that from an outside view you could just like lead you to undersize it and underestimate it. And that's, you know, within we've discussed, and Ron has done a good job discussing and the kind of the current economy and how much that's just like the tip of the iceberg in terms of what the local Philippines could be. There's a global Filipino community and how, you know, we've done like just like rough from our like rough estimates, right? Like if you take the income and buying power of the 10 million Filipinos outside the Philippines, that's actually like just as large as the Philippine kind of GDP. So people are just, but from that, like people are undersizing the Philippines by a factor of 2. And there's also kind of this like, you know, probably 3-5 years out, but Philippines is probably positioned more than like a lot of other countries, most other countries, to have a kind of breakthrough moment the same way that like Korean culture and Japanese culture have, right? Where it's not just Filipinos that you're able to reach with Filipino products and Filipino media, but like really like diehard fans around the world. So I think all of that is really exciting.
Definitely. And you know, one exciting part is with this increasing innovation and building, you know, all this infrastructure in the Philippines, it's creating that impact. And you know, as Manny mentioned a while ago, Balik-Bayan is not just that this idea of coming back home to the Philippines, but also creating that impact here and giving back to the country. So you know, I'd love for you, Rexy, for you to share more. You know, you kind of touched on it initially about, you know, providing employment to over 1,000 Filipinos through Kumu or even through Kayako. Like, what has been your impact in the Philippines so far?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're just and Roland can probably add on this too, but I think we're just starting on this. But yeah, on the live streaming side, we have this economy where if you watch a piece of content and you like the content or you like the creator, you send this animated GIF, and the streamer earns kind of a share of that as revenue. So that one, as you mentioned, it's about 800 people now who are earning at least. We call them internally FSCs, or financially successful creators. I think it's, for us, it's really like how we think about financially successful creators is really on the kind of more of a middle class and long tail of just people who, if you were able to, if you wanted to go full time into just creating content, you can do it, right? You can quit your day job and focus on this and growing your income on the creator side. So that we're really excited about, and we're trying to grow from 800 people to 3,000 people over the next year, and then 10,000 people over the next 2 years who are earning at least kind of double minimum wage in the Philippines. So that's kind of one. I think on the other side, which I think Roland can probably speak more on, is really the community and these people, these thousands of people who have found these tribes of 10 to 100 people on Kumu that they feel now are kind of family, and people who get them in a way that that maybe their real life kind of friends and family don't, or at least not to the same kind of level of like depth and the same kind of bond. And a third thing, which this part I think we haven't really started to do yet, but I think it ties into what Endeavor does, and what we hope for in like a 5 to 10 year time frame is to build, Kumu is a platform that people can like eventually build like their own businesses on top of an API, and there are like some businesses and agencies built on top of Kumu, right? That we're talking like, can brands be built on be built with Kumu as the first like channel for growth? Can eventually like mini apps and games be plugged into Kumu, and like businesses be built through that, to kind of like investments and spin-offs, and what kind of what Tencent has done in like in the Chinese and global space in terms of being probably the closest thing to Berkshire Hathaway of tech, that owns like 18% of or 10% of Snapchat and like 12% of Tesla and whatever it is, for us to be kind of that force within the Philippines as well, and support the companies, because for us, I think we have this sense that right now, if you look at the 10 largest companies in the Philippines, there's not really like a native internet company in there, right? I think there's the telcos, but in terms of like consumer internet, it's all you're either a telco or you're a more traditional like brick and mortar retail type of business. I think for us, we see that in a long enough time frame, there's room for not just one, but probably 2, 3, 4 kind of technology companies in that top 10. And we want to build one of them, but we want to also support the other 2 or 3 that that
because to Rexy's point, Rafi, when you're talking about impact, right? It's like, from a Kumu perspective, sure, we have about 1,000 people earning a full-time income live streaming, sure, and that the long-term goal is to get that closer to 10,000 financially successful creators. Right now, we're closing in on around 300 employees. Yes, it would be great to employ, say, 1,000 people plus over the next couple of years. But to Rexy's point, and Ron can attest to this too, is when you look at the Google to Massic report saying that the internet economy in the Philippines will grow in the 25 billion plus range in the next few years, then you start looking at companies like what Kakao was able to do, building a consumer internet champion in Korea, or say what Gojek was able to do, building a consumer internet champion in Indonesia, or what really inspires us, because we're more from a social gaming type, is VNG Corporation, what they were able to do in Vietnam, launching a $2 billion plus app ecosystem in Vietnam and really engaging the Vietnamese diaspora, similar to how the Filipino diaspora, if you actually look at the GDP per capita multiplied by the 11 million people around the world, you could actually argue that that particular GDP is actually bigger than the entire GDP of the Philippines itself. And so from there, it's not just Kumu, the consumer internet company, focusing around live streaming on Gen Z millennial communities. It's, for example, one, we just made our first investment in a podcasting company, or looking and mentoring a particular ed tech play that we really like, or gathering, I've been having these side chats with Endeavor and trying to get a bunch of startups where we could all live all next to each other in Poblacion and have this really cool technology sector of people where we could work and play, I guess. But I think there's something really beautiful about this opportunity that, there's a lot, like, for example, I just posted on LinkedIn recently, we have a live stream e-commerce play. Right? BCG says that e-commerce is a $4 trillion economic opportunity in the emerging market, and the 3 major levers are payments, logistics, and digital influence. And so when you look at the 3 things and you look at the way our live stream e-commerce, number 1, payments, you have companies like PayMongo, companies like Coins.ph, who we love and adore because we work so well with them, and also companies like Gcash. And when you look at logistics, we work with companies like Great Deals, which just raised $12 million. And then us on the digital influence side, which we're about to announce or not announce publicly, but we're about to finalize our Series B, which is much, much larger than what we closed for our Series A. And there's this kind of ecosystem that's starting to play out here. So for anyone interested in moving to the Philippines, it's a really interesting time because I wouldn't say it's exactly like, oh, super popular, like say like in Indonesia, like the way it is in Brazil, but just like this conversation that we had with Linda over at Endeavor, it kind of reminds Endeavor of what's happening in Mexico and how startups are starting to turn the corner there to become this like key emerging market that traditionally has not gotten a lot of attention like the way Brazil has, but the way Philippines is starting to turn a corner here, the way Indonesia has been getting a lot of attention. So it's just a really, really interesting time to do that.
Oh, definitely. And I love this idea of catalyzing really the whole ecosystem. And I think one of the best people who can talk about it is Ron. You have made huge impact here in Endeavor by mentoring so many entrepreneurs. I think, maybe you could share more about what you're doing to create an impact here in the Philippines.
Right. I just actually I want to second that thought line, which is Philippines is actually really well positioned, right? So I mean, yes, like Indonesia is ahead in terms of like the number of startups and the amount of funding, but that's exactly the reason why it's a great it's a great time to come here, right? I mean, I think also Rexy was saying this earlier, right? What is something that that other people don't know that you believe is true, right? And the market here is large. We're seeing everything starting to move, whether it's like payments and BSP or the logistic infrastructure is falling in place, e-commerce is like starting to take off. Everybody is moving to digital, including government. And there's still a lack of startup, a lack of founders, and a lack of, and still a lack of funding in the market, right? So basically, the space is here, and it's almost like an open canvas. And I think the gap in the lack of like startups and entrepreneurs is going to be bridged by I think it's going to be bridged largely by Filipinos coming back here, because when you look at like the skills range and the experiences that are necessary, there are Filipinos like in those positions with that knowledge like everywhere else in the world, right? That 10 million kind of talent bank that we can draw on to bring back here is key. If you go in the valley to any company, if it's Square, Facebook, Google, senior management and leadership that are either born and raised in Philippines or born to Filipino parents, like almost every single time. So, in a way, you can think about this as an arbitrage opportunity. You have a market that's underserved, where there's just not a lot of focus being given to over the past, decade or 2 decades, while other markets kind of sprinted a little bit ahead. And then you have, this great pool of talent that, it's kind of ready to launch forward on it. So for me, this can only go in one direction.
Oh, nice. And, maybe Ron, like you could share, how have you created an impact in this whole space? You see this kind of open canvas that's open for the taking. Have you been able to catalyze other entrepreneurs to kind of, fill in this canvas?
Yeah, I mean, I think the one nice thing about Philippines and Manila, the startup ecosystem, it's really a community, and it's a tight knit community. Almost everybody knows everybody, even though it's grown a lot over the past 5 years. It's still very much like a one degree network, and so all of us work together. Like I get a lot of founders kind of calling me and asking me questions, and what was your experience with this? How do you deal with like this bureaucratic piece or fundraising or issues with co-founders? All those things that it's a support network, right? I think Endeavor has been really great in pulling all of us together to help each other. But once you're here, you'll find, I mean, there's, it's not just me, there's a lot of people doing this. Like, I spent a bunch of time with the Paymongo guys, and Luis has been helping. Luis was one of the first Filipino companies, I think, other than Caliber, definitely the first in recent times to get into Y Combinator. And so he's been spending a lot of time helping other Filipino entrepreneurs getting into Y Combinator, like helping making sure their applications are good, like putting in a good word, etc. So it's definitely an environment where we're all trying to help each other go up.
Yeah, no, definitely.
And the same, I found the same thing, by the way. But I would say I found the same thing, myself coming here, almost 10 years ago, I think 8 years ago, and people lined up to help me in all sorts of ways, and quite selfishly, selflessly. They've made introductions, connections, like supported us in like all sorts of ways. So that, yeah, it's very strong. It's it's very Filipino, right?
Yeah. No, definitely. I love this whole idea of support.
Ron mentored us.
Yeah.
When we first moved, we didn't know what the hell we were doing, and Ron sat down with us at Kumu. Remember that, Rexy? We didn't. We have a messenger app. We don't know what we're doing. Well, thank you, Ron.
Yeah, no, Ron has definitely mentored a whole bunch of entrepreneurs here in the Philippines. Like, he's also helping us do our scale-up program and mentor some relatively smaller startup companies. So thank you so much for being that catalyst. I guess moving to the last question for the panel before we start on some questions from the audience. But what's your forecast for the next 5 to 10 years here in the Philippines? I've heard a whole bunch of excitement on this opportunity, but moving forward, what do you kind of see happening? I think maybe you can kick off with Ron. You can share more about. You mentioned that whole drawing that graph and seeing where the Philippines was. Where do you see it going?
I would say, I'll go even shorter. I'll wager within the next 2 years, we're going to see at least half a unicorn, if not a full unicorn valuation company. Space, I think, is big enough to do that. I think we're going to see a lot more kind of large, Series A and Series B rounds happening in the 20, 30, 40, 50, and plus like range and valuations that are in the hundreds. Again, because I think the momentum is there and like the market is quite, there used to be the Philippines discount on valuations, and I think that's gonna, it's still gonna apply, but it's gonna fade out to an extent. And so, I'm pretty optimistic. And then, the ideal scenario, I think, is what Roland said before. Is it would be nice to see a really strong established player emerging out of the Philippines, like someone like a Grab or a Gojek or a C, etc. But that, I think, is still TBD if that happens in a 5-year range or not.
Yeah.
Roland, any thoughts on that? 5 to 10 years, how the Philippines will look like?
Yeah, because to Ron's point, a C-sized opportunity, to Ron's point, yeah, could be closer from a 10-year range. I think within the first 5 years, though, again, when you look at the key things, right, you have a young market of 100 million people, continue to invest billions of dollars in internet infrastructure, specifically 4G LTE at scale and 5G. And then the third, I love the fact that, see, it says iPhone, but because of Vivo, Oppo, Huawei, Xiaomi, you could have an iPhone type of device in your hand for like $100. And as you continue to do that, and again, I think one of the secret sauces of the Philippines is the global Filipino diaspora. And because of the ability to transact, our wallet share with, I'm shocked that we're not just the #1 highest grossing social app in the Philippines, but, number 10 in Canada, number 18 in the US, number 4 in Hong Kong, number 5 in the UAE, number 9 in Kuwait, number 9 in the UK, number 9 in the UK, number 9 in Australia, and number 4 in New Zealand. That's not, sure, some of those are fans of Filipino culture, but a lot of it is because, you do have Filipinos in these key markets transacting so much, and it really was a huge boost to our unit economics and really helps us forecast at scale, what the Philippine economy or digital economy could look like in the next 5 years. So, definitely rooting for folks in the fintech space, folks in the e-commerce space, for us in the digital influence space. And, I think for the purposes of this audience, where we're actually getting our best talent is we've been hiring from the Ubers, the LinkedIn's, the Instacarts. I mean, people quitting their jobs in San Francisco and moving to the Philippines. Just sent an offer to someone at Spotify who's leaving their place in Los Angeles. People quitting their jobs in Singapore who used to work for Grab. You know, all people, a lot of our hires from Shopee, Lazada, you know, people who are actually quitting their jobs in Singapore, the US, Europe, Australia, and actually moving to the Philippines to help grow Kumu. I could see this happening all across the board with all the promising technology companies that are starting. And that's actually something that I do hope to see over the next 5 years as more and more people Balik-Bayaning. So, but anyways, yeah. So, but yeah, Rexy, I don't know. Rexy, I'll just give it to you.
Any final thoughts, Rexy?
Yeah. I'll second everything that Roland and Ron said, and kind of what Ron said on the 5-year timeline. I think I'm hoping that that's kind of a foundation for, you know, on a 10-year timeline, like not just a unicorn, but like there actually being a company, like a technology company that started as a startup, that is in the kind of top 10 in terms of like largest companies here in the Philippines, and with a potential and trajectory to be the largest, right? Because I mean, if you look at kind of the like American companies, they're or companies in China or any of the other markets that are further along in terms of the technology ecosystem, those companies eclipse eventually the
like real companies and all that stuff.
Eventually eclipse the traditional players, and especially within the Philippines, because I think depending on the type of product you're offering from a tech perspective, like your market is a lot less capped, right? Or you're able to offer your products and services to the world at large, the global Filipino and the world at large, where some of the kind of more traditional players are a bit more kind of fundamentally locked into to the local market. So I think that's one thing, to there being a or hopefully more than one kind of unicorn or half a unicorn type size companies in the Philippines in the next 5 years, and then setting up to something closer to like a $5 to $20 billion company in a 10-year horizon, and more than one, right? Yeah, I think that's the most important thing, that it's not just a company that does it, but an ecosystem of companies and a wave of enterprises being built. And yeah, and around that, just kind of, the talent kind of ecosystem growing more and more exciting, right? Like I think even in the past 3 years, it's or the past I started coming back really like 2014, so the past 6 years has changed a lot in terms of the kind of talent that's available. I think it's still hard to find to hire for certain roles, but the like some of the interns that we've gotten in their junior or senior year right now, like they have spent more time like learning things around like UX and design and those types of things that just weren't really a focus area back then from a kind of higher education perspective, and those people are starting to enter the workforce now, and I think that's only gonna like reinforce itself if everything kind of goes the way it looks like it's gonna go.
Very exciting future, I guess, for the Philippines. We want to save some time for some questions from the audience. I see a couple here. And actually, Roland and Rexy, you kind of touched on one of the questions I want to cover from Timothy about building an engineering team. So I think I'll let Ron kind of take a crack on it. First, from Timothy, curious about your thoughts on building and growing an engineering team in the Philippines. So how did your hiring process go? Was it more of a mix of Filipinos, people from outside the Philippines? What did it look like, Ron?
I think being very direct and honest is hard. It's hard to build a tech team in the Philippines, and I always separate this on talent and experience, right? So talent is obviously here, But experience is not necessarily here. It's hard to find, like if you're building a, like a scaled out like streaming platform like Kumu, right? Like to find people who have, have that experience, who worked already at a company that streams like video at scale or whatever it is, like it's just not here. Sometimes there are, but like not, if you're trying to hire 20 or 30 in a year.
Is Ron's?
Yeah, Ron, I think you're having some issues with your video. Hello?
Yeah, but he's absolutely correct. I mean, tech is so hard to find here. I mean, the only way that we could grow our tech company is by hiring people from Coins. Like, you know what I mean? Where there's a lot of that, right? And to his point about experience, that's exactly it. Like I said, our data scientist was a data scientist at Grab in Singapore, and him having to quit his job in Singapore and move, like that's the type of moves that you actually have to make. Or for example, hiring people from some of the best technology companies, like, people, I can't say the app, but I'll just say they're the most downloaded app in the world right now, right? Where you have to consult people who have experience from those types of companies to be able to mentor and help bring people over. It's one of the most difficult things. And so to be completely honest, we do have a distributed team where we do own a company in China, right? Or we do own and have talent in other places. But yeah, I think that, UI UX is very strong. Front-end development, very strong. Back-end, yeah, okay. But with the type of experience, to Ron's point, to be able to scale something that's multiple million active users, it's really hard. And it's something that we're currently struggling with right now. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's really more of an experience thing than like a skills and talent thing.
Yeah.
I think the skills and talent are there. It's just the kind of, if you're able to I think what we've seen work in like small ways in different corners of companies. If you have like just talented people who can learn fast, and then you bring in kind of a leader who's to a degree seen it before. And that's kind of like one of the hardest parts, right? Because there's just not a lot of companies that have went from zero to like millions of users. So you kind of have to either just look for people who've gotten the closest kind of experience to that. Some of those people are, people who are heading kind of their own startups locally. We've gotten some good hires from that, especially on the technical side. Some of that is like country managers who built maybe not whole companies, but have built like an office of a company within the Philippines. Some of that is, you hire people who are based in Singapore or the US and bring them back here. And if that person is, if that person has the experience and is a strong manager and a strong leader, then you can get a team that's up there pretty fast. It's just kind of getting those foundations of the team that can like learn and adapt enough, and then somebody who has like both the experience and the ability to communicate that experience out, and then sometimes you pull in just consultants like we've been working with a Silicon Valley design firm
that's exactly what he's saying, is you get like a super talented person, because there's a lot of talented people in the Philippines, and then we bring in like a consultant, someone who actually built, if you guys have heard of a company called Slack, it's pretty cool for communications, joke, right? And they actually built Slack from the ground up, or they actually redid the Uber driver app, right? And when you have someone that talented coaching and training and helping our product team get things to thing, even if we just absorb 60% of that person's consulting, it really elevates the whole local team up. Same thing with consulting some of the top AI and personalization and recommendation people on the planet. We're really bringing in a lot of these Jedis to come in and really pour their experience into these super talented Filipinos, who ironically we have hired from the best companies around the world, whether it's Instacart to Uber, LinkedIn. We just made a hire from Facebook. People who are actually having to literally move from the US and from Singapore and move to the Philippines to join us.
Okay, yeah, and I'm seeing this. There's definitely talent here in the Philippines. It's more of pulling that experience elsewhere and upskilling the local talent to really develop these. Well, especially that's a challenge about innovating in your field. You're probably the first one here, so it's difficult to hire for that. Moving on to the next question. This is from Ryan, and this actually is a question for Rexy. I'll just read it out loud. I remember all our conversations about Kayako and how deeply passionate you were about it. You've definitely put sweat, tears, and more into Kayako, maybe at the sacrifice of self-sustainability. What would you say to your younger self about self-sustainability and scaling your vision for impact?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing for me on that, I mean, that was definitely a lot of, yeah, that was a chapter, but I think the biggest thing I probably learned, like not just from Kayako, but the differences from when I was doing that and to what I'm doing now. Like I think the stakes are higher in a lot of ways with Kumu, but I think I'm also getting more sleep and I'm also like less like stressed out and have more free time. And I think that's like the difference maker there is really like both having the right team around you, which I think like Roland just really did a great job of seeding the that first set of people who brought in the next wave of people. That has been kind of our core at Kumu, and then two is like is trusting that team, and I think that's probably kind of as a first time founder was the kind of hardest thing was the kind of trust and delegation and management side of it that I think within Kumu we were able to do a lot. Yeah, just kind of do a lot faster. I think because of the people that we both the people that we had on board and the kind of culture of like transparency and honesty and just like if we disagree about something we just we like yell at each other a lot and then like love each other a lot.
Yeah, it's a really cool
difference
culture
maker for us.
It's very interesting culture. I was just dealing with a lot of our leaders time. It's pretty cool.
Okay. So I guess we have one last. We have time for one last question. I think Ron might be joining, but he seems to have some trouble with internet. But anyway, I think this is especially appropriate for Roland and Rexy. It's about fundraising. Really, what are your thoughts on how the access of capital here in the Philippines is evolving and how new entrepreneurs can think on raising capital? Any thoughts, Roland, Rexy? Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting time, right? Like I remember when we, so this is just kind of history, right? Historically, when a startup tries to start here, one of the conglomerates would kind of come in, make an investment, but the thing is that investment is like a majority stake in your company, and then you kind of lose control and you don't know what to do, right? And that was kind of a lot of honest pushback for a lot of promising startups that when they finally got to a scale where they needed additional investment, when you look at the cap table, international investors get scared because they go, wait a minute, are you really running this company? Because this conglomerate owns a majority stake in your company, and then boom, they end up getting acquired and then donezo, right?
Yeah.
And so I think there was just an initial shift. And we got really lucky, Liza Gokongwei, the owner of Summit Media, when she made an investment and helped us get to a scale that got the attention of an international investor, which is Open Space Ventures. So when Open Space Ventures invested in our Series A at a particular valuation that is like, I guess you would say is a lot higher than to the comfort of a conglomerate of say, some of the major business families here. It was really helpful for us because it was able to really push back maybe some particular conglomerates that were saying, yeah, I'll invest in you for 80% of Kumu. And we're like, yeah, we can't give 80% of Kumu away. That's crazy. We wouldn't even be able to control the company at the stage. And it's not their fault. It's just that was the particular timing of that time and place. And so, and now I think a lot of the local players are starting to see the reason why you don't take so much of it, because now Kumu is at a stage where say I don't want to say what we're raising now, but say like when we raise 75 to 100 million dollars at another stage, you really need that growth capital and some of that control to be able to attract international investors to get Kumu to a consumer internet scale, to be able to, you know, employ tens of thousands or say thousands of people, supporting the livelihoods of tens of thousands of people, having an impact on millions of people. To get to that scale, you can't give up so much of your company at the early stages. So that's been one of the major changes that's happening recently, that because of not just us, but, you know, with Ron was huge for us. When Gojek made that acquisition, it was like, okay, cool. It put the Philippines on the map. And then when Steve raised $12 million, when PayMongo raised $12 million, these are like eye-opening types of raises that now, for the first time, people could actually start raising money from international investors who actually believe in the Philippine thesis. Because before, when you were a startup and you were raising money, you always had to say, oh, TAM, total addressable market. So after the Philippines, what are your plans for Vietnam? What are your plans for Indonesia? Blah, 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 blah. You always get stuck in that pigeonhole. But now for the first time, you have international investors who believe enough in the Philippine economy that they're willing to invest and just say, look, stay focused on the Philippines, build your internet company around the Philippine market and go to town. And that has been a huge shift in the international investor world that has really been game changing for a lot of us entrepreneurs who are interested in raising money here.
Okay. So we're running out of time, but I guess Ron, any other thoughts on how the capital, well, access to capital here in the Philippines has evolved and where it is now?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Roland. It's an education process, right, on both sides, and I think it's it's kind of taking place, right? And every time there is another data point, every time one of us raises money, it helps everybody, everybody else. I think, and I still believe that founders are executing on interesting opportunities. Like good founders are working on interesting opportunities will find capital no matter what, and a lot of time it does. It will come to going outside for, to Singapore or to the US for external investors who know how to properly kind of value and structure these deals. But as the local market is getting more educated, we're going to see the local conglomerates playing as well and support and do that on terms that are, startup friendly, that are not like inhibiting or blocking the potential of the company like down the line. Yeah, I mean, the market in the Philippines to me is still like bound by lack of entrepreneurs, right? It's not bound by the number of opportunities. There's tons of opportunity to do things here. I don't think it's even bound by the amount of capital that can be turned to it, because there is a lot of capital sitting in Singapore, like pointing at Southeast Asia, but it's going to Indonesia because HBS grads and Stanford grads are going back there and are starting companies. And then local people now have like 5-10 year experience of working at like Gojek or Tokopedia, and then they're splitting off and starting on their companies. So I think the more talent we see flowing into the Philippines, the more capital and resources we're going to see directed towards a startup ecosystem here and towards digital transformation of the country.
Okay. So unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. But I wanted to thank again all our panelists for taking the hour to share your knowledge and get us all really excited about giving back and Balik-Bayaning. And thank you to all of our audience for joining us. To learn more about Endeavor, please visit our website. And if you do have any mentors or entrepreneurs that you'd want to nominate, feel free to do it there. And we'll also be sending a copy of this recording as well as that nomination form to everyone over email. So thank you, everyone, and have a good day or evening. Bye, everyone.
Take care.
Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.